Need I even mention Goebbels, whose use of radio was very, very specific during the maintenance of power by the Third Reich. And he said something about, I can't remember the exact quote, but it's something about what we have got here. I think he meant the radio, but he was probably also talking about the television, because, well, the television was actually developing in Nazi Germany, but there was also the cinema. And the cinema took the German newsreels, the combat newsreels, for example, the invasion of Poland. It's a typical example. And they would send the Wehrmacht cameraman in with the frontline troops. Cameraman would film the storming of Danzig or whatever. They would rush the negative back to laboratories in Berlin, I imagine, or somewhere, and by lorry they would drive the prints all over Germany. So probably the next day or the following day, the Germans were sitting there looking at the newsreels within a day or so of the event. And Goebbels knew how effective this was in maintaining the system, and had some incredible statement about this represents the real way to reach the heart of people. He talked about the heart of people. And this is what we're doing today with the monoform. We're systematically, deliberately fixating countless millions of people in front of the screen, the small screen of television, the large screen of the cinema, fixed into a hierarchical thing. And we, the public, are systematically buying into this. In North America alone, I don't know what the figures are in Europe, they're probably fairly horrendous. I think it's a figure for 2 years ago, 1998. The North American public invested, put into the box office, $50 billion. You imagine that? $50 billion in 1 year was spent by the public in distraction, entertainment, slothing off, whatever we do, having a kick. Now, at this moment in time, you know as well as I that the incredible cost of globalization today to humanity, and for example, I think, I don't have the figure here, but I think it is 32 million people in developing countries are suffering from the AIDS virus now, who can't afford the medication because of the pharmaceutical companies and so on and so forth. Can you imagine what even a portion of $50 billion spent on endless shit, audiovisual shit? Can you imagine what we could do with that money? What could be done, the lives that could be saved? Do you think there's any debate about this? In my profession, or in schools where teachers... Of course there isn't. Do you think there's any debate about the monoform? Do you think there's any debate about the reactionary, hierarchical, totally undemocratic process that the media is? Of course there isn't. As I've said, media professionals, most of them, are so afraid now of stepping an inch out of line for fear of losing their budgets. The fear is unbelievable in television and the cinema today, particularly in television. And in schools, you could come with me. We could go to in classrooms in France, England, Lithuania, North America. It doesn't matter. You would very rarely find young people who know anything about the monoform, the real possibilities of communication that there are in the cinema and television. You'd find instead students who've completely lost their history. They probably are not even sure who President Kennedy is now. I'm not joking. And increasingly academics, who should know since they're a part of the problem, are discussing this. Students who don't know what World War II is, no idea of the issues behind World War I, vaguely may have heard of President Kennedy, and a German, excuse me, I'm not sure if he's a German, anyway, yes, possibly, excuse me, a journalist wrote an article in a paper which came out a few weeks ago, and, excuse me, I'm not sure if he's German or American, but anyway, it really doesn't matter. He wrote this: I've recently returned to Austin, Texas, After teaching at universities in Berlin and Cologne, I was accustomed to the indifference American students display whenever they read about foreigners assaulting McDonald's or denouncing Hollywood's domination of the international film market. American students live in the belly of the global beast, so they are befuddled by complaints about America's cultural impact on the world. But, to my astonishment, I encountered the same complacency about the globalization of American culture among German students. They are comfortable with, or at least resigned to, the omnipresence of global culture. They do not worry that their language is being subverted by English words, or that their tastes are shaped by Hollywood blockbusters, or that their local bookstores are threatened by Amazon.com. They have little attachment to the cultural past, nor can they contemplate any alternatives to the globalized world they inhabit. They are neither rebels nor conservatives. The young simply shrug. And then later in the article, the journalist or the teacher continues, the majority of the young in Germany and America, and of course he could add a lot of other countries to the list, have little interest in politics. And they are untroubled by what they see on their movie, television, or computer screens. So they may be the first generation that is unlikely to protest the spread of globalization, either in economics or culture. Well, of course, that's a controversial statement because it's like all things in this complex world. It's both true and untrue. There are a considerable number of young people, thank God, considerable number, who are joining the forces of those protesting against globalization. And it's very, very important to underline that. However, sort of yin and yang balance one way or another. Unfortunately, also what I think this teacher writes is also very true. In generalization, if we can generalize, the larger majority of students, through no fault of their own, are losing their history and are being pushed or forced or manipulated or encouraged, let's really say, into an increasingly passive role vis-a-vis society. And that's something that should really, really concern us very, very much.